Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and welcome to Construction Project Management Tips. Today we're going to be looking at motivation and engagement and how we can apply it in the construction industry. Motivation and engagement is an important aspect of being successful in running a construction business. If we want to be productive and we want to provide our clients with extra value and we want to have a happy workforce, we have to find ways to ensure that we motivate our employees, or at the very least keep them engaged in their work. You know, it's not always the easiest thing because it's a very intrinsic thing and unique to individuals how people are motivated. But there are a number of steps that we can do to improve upon this. This is one of several videos that I've shot in this particular area. So today I'm going to look at particular theories in motivation and how that maybe transcends into the construction industry. I put this quote up here. I got it, I think, from Brené Brown's website. It's a quote from James Clear. He wrote a book called Atomic Habits, which is a great book, how people form habits and some of the things that you need to do to be better at forming habits. And it says the ultimate form of intrinsic motivation is when a habit becomes part of your identity. It's one thing to say, I'm the type of person who wants this. It's something very different to say, I'm the type of person who is this. And of course, if you have people that are already engaged and understand what that means, then that's much easier because they believe that this is part of them. This is who they identify. And that's the aspect of intrinsic, meaning it's internal, as opposed to extrinsic, which I talked about in a previous video, which is like monetary bonuses, that sort of thing. Let's take a look and talk a little bit more about this. Well, we definitely want to build trust, and we definitely want to have respect for people if we're to be successful in construction. The companies that I've seen that have gone the furthest with the least problems and are able to sustain it over time definitely build in qualities into their cultures around trust and having respect for people. If the people working for you believe you trust them, they're going to be putting more effort into their work. If they feel they're respected, they're going to stay longer. They're going to be very valuable employees over the long term. You know, there's a number of things you have to do for that. And of course, I think the industry has changed a lot in the last 30 years or so on this particular topic. But you definitely want to have respect for your employees. You want to be sincere. You want to do what you say you're going to do. So don't make false promises. And that's building trust, and that's being ethical, and that's a whole bunch of other topics combined there. You also have to be careful about what you say and how you say it. Sometimes you can definitely throw people off, perhaps unintentionally, without really being conscious of the way that you're implying certain things and giving feedback on certain things. Definitely want to communicate openly with your employees, so that, and on a constant basis, and I've talked about that in a previous video. Want to make sure that you're engaging with them on a personal level as well, that you're understanding, that you're being empathetic, and you want to practice friendliness. It's that old saying, you get more with honey than you do with vinegar, and there's a lot of truth in that. So it does take, for some people, it comes kind of natural. For other people, it could be cultural, it could be how you were brought up. It's a lot more difficult that way. But if you're a little bit more attuned to it, you can sort of see where you can make improvements in those areas. And there's a whole bunch of research and theories behind motivation. It's not just people espousing things. And some of these theories you may have heard of. Probably this one is the most widely known, Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, named after Abraham Maslow, who developed this in the 1950s. Other motivational theories have been adapted from that over time. But it definitely has that people are at different levels at different times in their lives. There's certain things. So we talked about intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. Well, extrinsic rewards becomes important if you're trying to pay the bills. So if you're kind of just barely able to make things ends meet, you're probably down at this level. You're trying to survive. You got to have this job. You really need this job. And that's, that's going to tie to some of the other theories we'll talk about, such as theory X and theory Y. Sometimes when you're at these basic levels, sometimes employers take advantage of employees, and they pay them the absolute minimum, and there can be sort of threats hanging over their head if they don't comply with certain things, and so there's a lot of pressure that way. Next level, sort of the physiological needs, so belongingness, love needs, intimate relationships, friends, esteem needs, prestige, feelings of accomplishments. Well, this can also be, you've created a tribe in your business and you have a group. And how do people feel? Do they feel safe and secure at work? Do they feel that they belong to a team, to a group? And that can be a very positive aspect from that perspective. If they don't, that can be a very negative aspect. So I don't feel like I belong here, and I'm just kind of going through the motions. I'm disengaged with my work. I don't feel like I belong in this group. So then I'm an outsider. I'm not getting all of the information. It's not clear. People are withholding things from me. That can be a very sort of disengaging environment. Self-actualization, well, now you're bringing in a lot of the self-fulfillment requirements, and you're feeling that you can be creative, you can think outside the box, you're not being micromanaged, somebody's not watching your every single move. You're going beyond just thinking about yourself, you're looking at very often helping others. And sometimes to get to this level, it kind of depends on the business you're in and at what level you are within the business, but some businesses are actually able to create an environment where a lot of people can move into this zone more readily. It's more open to that kind of thing. So, I'm thinking about in cases where you've created an environment like we do in the last planner system in lean construction, where you're involving all the trades in the discussions and the planning and the scheduling, and you're looking for creative ideas, and you're making sure that you're not shutting people down, and so now they feel they're part of the group, and now it goes beyond just their own company and optimizing for the individual trades, it's optimizing for the project. That can be really, really beneficial to projects if you've got many people that are kind of engaging in that way. Whereas traditionally everybody's kind of in it for themselves and what can they optimize for themselves? Maybe not so much, right? So there's different ways that we can view this and apply it in construction situations from my mind, knowing what I know about motivational theory, having taught it a number of years at University of Toronto, and then my construction understanding, having applied it on an ongoing basis, consulting and working with many companies. And so there's this combination of theory and practice where you can see certain things that can be beneficial in how you set up and structure your projects. So like self-actualized people are realists who face facts rather than deny or avoid them. Very good. You got a problem on the project, you'll face the facts, have a good understanding of where you're at, almost like the Stockdale paradox, if you want to look that one up. I've talked about that before as well. Understanding what's the reality of your situation. Spontaneous in their ideas and actions. You can imagine if you're trying to make improvements in the way that you do your processes in a construction business, you could have a brainstorming session and people are feeling that they can't have a bad idea, that they can be spontaneous, creative with it. You're going to get a lot more inputs. If everybody's trying to be strategic and outsmart each other, you're probably not going to get the full benefits because it's going to be detrimental to the benefits of the business overall. And you'll stifle creativity. Interested in solving problems, often solving problems of others. Well, isn't that a novel idea, to be collaborative and creative? An electrician has an idea that will help your plumber just with the strategic layout of the materials in the site logistics plan. That can be a very beneficial thing when you get that kind of collaboration. It's the old saying that none of us is as smart as all of us, especially when we're collaborating and engaging with very knowledgeable people that are really interested in the success of the project. And able to view things in an objective manner. So these are kind of the things, if you get more of your people reaching this sort of more optimum level, that definitely helps to move your business forward, as opposed to operating in a state of fear and basic needs. That's not going to get you where you want to go. There is another theory that was further developed after Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going to kind of go a little bit with from historic to more current. So a few of the examples. There's a lot more motivational theories out there, and none of them are perfect. None of them are perfect, but you can see some commonality that's threaded through them, and that's where I think it's the space between the spaces where you get the most benefit in understanding different aspects, because we are all human, and trying to make that work is pretty complex. But the more you have a little bit of understanding there, you can apply different tools, adjust and pivot in different situations. So theory X and theory Y really is an interesting one, because many construction companies I know still operate kind of under a theory X kind of criteria, as opposed to the most successful ones, which will operate under theory Y. And that's more on the fear base. That's more on the lower elements of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's where you don't trust people. That's where you think, going back to Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, where he wrote that people will work as slovenly as possible for the emoluments that they'll be provided, comes in, right? Slovenly means they're going to do the very minimum they can do while still not losing their job and getting paid. And if you kind of have that view of humanity and people, well, yeah, you know what? You're right. That's what you're going to get. It's like the Henry Ford saying, if you think you can't, you can't. If you think you can, you can. Well, if you think that you can't trust anybody on your projects and none of your workers, guess what? You can't, because you've created an environment where they feel they're not trusted. So theory X is kind of that, and most people must be coerced, controlled, directed, threatened with punishment to get them to put forth adequate effort towards organizational goals. Not the way you want to structure a company in this century and in the developed world. Now, again, culturally, some of you may be in developing countries, and you still have a lot of that. In the developed world, we still have a lot of that too. But people have also seen some of the other opportunities. We've been talking about the Great Resignation lately, and I think any employer that's been employing people under Theory X, unless they're really going back to Maslow, unless they're really at this where they're too worried to move jobs, or they can't get another job, then they're going to leave. It's like, I'm not going to put up with that. There's other opportunities. And we're talking about the construction industry here. North America, for sure, and I know most parts of Western Europe, it's a pretty good, pretty vibrant industry, even through COVID. And so people have choices. The best workers have choices. So if you want to operate under Theory X, you're going to be left with people that don't have choices. And why don't they have choices? They're not that engaged, they're not that motivated, and they don't have that many choices to move. The best people, they have choices and they've gone. And so your competition has gotten your best employees. You've got the ones that you've kind of not given the opportunities to grow, and they're not, and they don't have other opportunities. And that's putting you in a very, very negative position. So you can observe this in a lot of cases in places as well. Theory Y, of course, means the opposite. It means that we have trust in our employees. We are creating an environment for them to grow and thrive, as I talked in a previous video about the plant. You're creating that environment, and you believe the best of your employees. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to typically have issues with some employees, etc. But by and large, you're not going to let the trivial few affect the critical many. All right, if we're to use Duran's term. So Theory Y really comes into play that way. And, some companies, they're not all Theory X, not all Theory Y, and they're kind of in that middle zone. There is that too. It's not always all black or all white. There's the gray zone in between that occurs as well. And in some industries, it may be required to be much more heavily regulated as a result of safety and other issues like pharmaceuticals and things like that nature. And of course, the safety side of construction needs to be highly regulated to ensure safety. But I think in a Theory Y environment, that's fine. But it's really coming across that we're not doing all of these safety regulations because the government says we have to. We're doing all these safety regulations because we want you safe. Our employees, from a moral and ethical standpoint, we want you safe. That's a different perspective than Theory X. So the creativity and ingenuity, that really comes out. So that self-actualization, those higher levels really start to come out in a Theory Y environment. So that's why you can see the connection between Maslow and McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. Now, I'll get you a little bit more current here. There's been a lot more current research that's been done over the past few decades. Mihaly came up with this term and research and is renowned for it. He recently passed away, but he is very renowned for flow and what it takes. And all of you can identify with flow. It's when you're in that state where things just go and you're challenged, but you're not overly stressed about it. I'll talk about the Dodson curve again when it comes up in a few slides, but you're not overly stressed, but there's a little bit there, but you feel confident you can do it. So it's sort of engaging you in what you're doing, right? You're not getting bored doing it. It's not too easy. And so you're completely involved. These are the points that he outlined in his book. A sense of ecstasy of being outside everyday reality. Greater inner clarity, know what needs to be done and how well we are doing it. In construction, there's so much of that you see. You see it in trades when things are flowing and they're just going from one thing to the next and they're just got a good rhythm of it. We talk about tact time and having a good rhythm to the work when we talk about lean practices and having a nice even flow in construction. So flow from this theory ties very much with flow in a construction project, where we try to design our projects where we don't have stops and starts the way traditionally we get a lot of stops and starts. The end game is to have a continuous flow to our projects, and from an individual perspective, it's going to put individuals much more evenly into that flow. And so looking at these points, a sense of serenity, timelessness, thoroughly focused on the present. Hours seem to pass by in minutes. Intrinsic motivation, whatever produces flow becomes its own reward. Well, imagine you have a workforce that is feeling that way. You're going to be at higher levels. You're going to have more intrinsic motivation. You're going to have less stress, bad stress, and that's going to be really beneficial for your business. And so when we look at flow, it really comes in this zone, right? You got to have a sense of control. You got to have a sense of excitement or arousal about it. It doesn't come when you've got a lot of anxiety, worry, apathy. This is on the other end. You're not getting it there, right? It's low. You're not going to get into flow, right? You're going to get into flow when you're into this zone here. That's where it comes in. And that's where you really start to see a lot of advancement, a lot of motivation, a lot of engagement. The problem is flow is very difficult to achieve these days, because to be in flow, you got to be in that rhythm. You jump out of that rhythm when you check your phone or you check your eye. I'm looking over here because I put it away from me so I don't take it up when I'm doing certain work. I try to have it. What I should do is throw it in the freezer, right? When I'm doing certain focused work, I want to get into flow. And then if I check my phone and I want to see what's going on, or an email pops up or that sort of thing, it distracts you and takes you out of that environment. So that's something you got to watch out for and try to mitigate those kind of distractions, because it really does interrupt flow, and it's something that's systemically a problem today. The next item that I wanted to cover was, in theory, is deliberate practice. Well, that ties into the whole continuous improvement aspect. And in construction, we better be continuously improving, or else we're continuously falling behind. And so Peak was a book written by Anders Ericsson, and he's the world-renowned researcher on basically learning. And the 10,000 hour rule that you might have heard Malcolm Gladwell talk about came from his research. Except it's not 10,000 hours of work makes you a master of something. it's 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. I know lots of carpenters that have worked 10,000 hours, and I wouldn't call them a master of carpentry. I do know some that have worked 10,000 hours, and I would call them a master of carpentry. It's deliberate practice, and that means getting feedback, and that means working towards getting better. So now, if you're managing groups of people and trades, say you're a 4-person and you're managing a crew of trades, if you're giving them really good feedback as they're doing things, not being like that you don't trust them, not being that you are micromanaging them, but you're doing it in a way to make them better. And of course, if they get better as a team, the team's going to be more productive and have all those benefits. But if they really feel that you're engaging with them, that's the personal side, to make them better, then they are going to respect that, and they are going to get better, because that's deliberate practice. They're going to have that continuous improvement mindset, not just on the project level, but on how they do things level. And that's really going to accelerate the improvements that your crews, your teams, your business will have. And so it's a very interesting aspect of tying that together with the other theories and applying it in a construction environment that I see that it works. The third one of the more contemporary ones, this is very recent in the last 5 to 10 years, Angela Duckworth's grit theory. And she's written a book on that, like the other authors have as well. Again, she's a research professor, and she has studied grit in detail, looking at the military, looking at things like some of the elite programs, like at West Point, etc., and what makes people be able to get through things. So her formula is, well, because everybody always refers to talent, and Erickson refers to talent, right, as well. He says talent only helps so much. It's really the deliberate practice. So she says the same thing. Talent counts once. All right, so yeah, there are some people that are much more talented than others. There are people that can pick up the piano much quicker than others. There are people that are more dexterous, have more dexterity with their hands, with trades and different things. But that advantage doesn't really carry through unless that individual puts the effort to really develop the skill. And once they develop the skill, then continuously putting that effort in, that's going to lead them to higher levels of achievement and mastery, or to be able to get through some major thing they're trying to do. So that's where grit theory ties in with deliberate practice, right? And of course, to get through some of these things too, at certain moments, we also want to be in flow, so that things we're able to do things over a period of time and have a certain intrinsic joy in what we're doing. They do kind of interact as well. It's hard to be deliberate practice, means it's got to be a little bit on the pressure side of the Dodson curve. So it's got to be a little bit on the other side, where it is causing you a little bit more effort to learn something new. So you got to push through that and work through that. And that's that effort counts twice part of it. You can't really be in flow and really learning something that's quite new to you at the same time, because there's usually a little bit of pushback stress that comes into it. But you can be refining things that you're getting down, and you can be tweaking them, and you're getting better and better with the flow side. So this is how these different environments come in. And so that's why I'm saying with the Yerkes-Dodson law, which was developed in the early 1900s, but it makes a lot of sense. There is that optimal stress. There's good stress and there's bad stress. And, like, you should be just peeking over. If you get too much into the bad stress, you quit. And then you burn out, you quit, or you change careers or something of that nature. If you keep yourself stressed, but it's like challenging stress and you're enjoying it. And the work environment you set for your teams is not making it seem like it's fearful. You're going to have people engaged over the long term. Can you get something through with fear in a very short period? Yeah, but over the long term, people, again, going back to what I said earlier, people have choices and they leave. And so that puts you in a negative position. So you can think about it this way. And again, some of you can all think about this personally. Sometimes it's also you working on yourself individually, right? Like maybe you were in sports and you were great in practice, but you never could produce on game day. Well, maybe you put too much stress on yourself, so you had to work on making sure that that stress that you would feel on game day, that you could practice out of it in the practice side, so that when you got there on game day, you'd been there 1,000 times and it wasn't so stressful for you. There's different tools and techniques can be used for that as well. So fear and desire, two of the world's strongest motivators. That's the other thing that we're dealing with. That's part of an uphill battle is, people will work hard to avoid pain. Then they'll work to attain desire. So that's, again, if you've got a fearful workplace, well, I'm going to leave, or I'm going to do what you want in the short term, and then I'm going to leave. It's not going to be engaging and creative environment. And people under fear aren't as creative as they normally are. There's been studies under that, or pressure or stress. Going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What are your biggest fears? How do they motivate you? Now, that's the other thing, is you can identify what your fears are, and then how do they engage you, right? And to what level do they engage you? And if you're fearful, what things can you do to mitigate those fears? And, there can be some fears, that, bring you up to this optimal stress level, as long as they're not taking you over the top to the negative side. And, what are your greatest desires and how do they motivate you? And understanding, the avoidance of fear. Because the thing with greatest desires, you can just think about it yourself. A lot of times it's easier to flick on the TV and just sort of vegetate watching it, when there's other things that you actually desire to do, but it's going to take time. It's a long-term goal, and it's harder to break down. That ties back to the opening statement with James Clear, and making sure that you have habits and rituals and routines that makes it much easier for you to do. That's why it's easier too, when we're talking about construction, to have systems in place that make it easier for people to engage, to make it easier for people to give feedback, to be creative, to feel they're part of the team. And if you make that part of your systems, then it's something that just happens. And you get a lot of beneficial results when you put other little skill sets and traits mixed into that system. And then it can help you to flourish as a business in a sustainable way. All right. So some of the things, of course, when I talk about sustaining, share the vision of the way everyone should be treated. I've talked about this in a previous video. Recognize excellent performance. Be accessible. Keep everyone informed. Mentor, coach, and teach. And if you're doing all of these things that we've been discussing, or even a few of them, not all of them, but a few of them, and you're keeping that in mind, and start small, little thing at a time, Start small, and then you build it up over time. You build those habits, rituals, and routines up over time, and that'll be beneficial. So I'm Tom Stephenson, wishing you a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Please, if you enjoyed this, click the subscribe icon and the likes. Put a comment in if there's something that resonated with you, and notifications so you can see future PM Tips videos, and if we can grow the construction community together. Bye for now.